Alright, fine.
You got me.
Resident Evil 4 it's a good game. It's a good game. In my defense, you guys tricked me last time, okay? Everyone pulled a big old prank on me. They said, oh dude, Resident Evil 2 Remake is awesome. And I was like, really? Oh boy, am I excited. And then I played it and it was super boring. And since then, I've developed crippling trust issues. I don't think Resident Evil 2 is a bad game necessarily. I just don't enjoy it personally. It was too slow, I got bored of the locations pretty quickly, and it seemed to focus a lot on tense, tight, spooky encounters, but I never found anything scary, so I never got the experience it wanted me to have. I've been kinda interested in other Resident Evil games before. 7 looks interesting, but I played the demo and said, yeah, I don't know if I'd play this for like 10-ish hours. 8 looks all spiffy and shiny and a lot like 4, but it didn't quite do enough to get me to check it out. And 3 Remake looks like 2 Remake, but smaller and by all accounts worse. But from the very beginning, I'd heard nothing but endless praise for the original Resident Evil 4, so I knew at some point I needed to check it out. Honestly, if I hated this one, this series just isn't for me, simple as that. I actually caved on the VR version of Resident Evil 4 last year because I wanted stuff to play on my Oculus and it had basically 10s across the board, and I enjoyed it a lot. It was a full-blown game with a lot of immersive survival horror stuff, and shooting and dodging things in VR is always fun. But then I kinda ran into a problem. See, I liked Resident Evil 4 VR, but I wasn't sure how much of that was because it was in VR and how much of it was because the base game of RE4 is really good. And the other side of that problem is that because I had its VR version, I had a harder time coming back to it over and over because it's like a whole commitment. Like I have to set up my whole room for it, and at a certain point I just said, okay, I think I might have gotten my fill of this game. I'm good. This series is fun in VR, but I don't know if the classic experiences are my thing. And then the Resident Evil 4 Remake was announced, and I was like, no, I'm not gonna do it, okay? I already bought a version I liked, I played about 5 hours and felt satisfied with that experience. I'm out of the game, okay? I'm retired. I don't want another Resident Evil 2 situation. But then more and more and more and more and more and more people kept telling me how great this remake was, and before I even knew what was happening, I spent nearly $100 on a game that I bought a cooler version of last year, so thank God it turned out to be amazing. One of the first things I appreciated about this game is just how easy it is to play. Maybe it's just because I remember how long it took me to get through the first few chapters in the VR version, but I found chapter after chapter just zipping by, especially near the beginning, and I wasn't having that survival horror fatigue that I was getting even when playing Dead Space's remake a couple of months ago, where I just couldn't play for long stretches. I bought Dead Space 2.5 months ago and I'm still not done. I bought Resident Evil 4 4 days ago and I hit credits yesterday. It's just way easier to slip into. I think part of that is it nailing a really good pace with its combat that suits me a little bit better. It's still a slow, hunky survival horror game, not a full action title, but you have enough of a pep in your step for it to not feel torturously slow. This game has a lot of big encounters, even early on where enemies feel almost endless. I'd say it even goes a touch too far even. A few encounters definitely overstay their welcome, including near the end where the game does go full action, but the number of weapons you have and the rate of fire, the parrying, the explosive environments, everything adds up to faster, more intense combat than was present in RE2 while still keeping you in check. You still just have normal weapons. At no point did I feel like I had a significant advantage over my enemies, which is important for a survival horror game. If you remember in my Dead Space review, I said that some of the tension was lost as the game got crazier and you got better weapons, and part of why I think that was an issue to me was that I found the initial tension to be a huge reason why that game was so effective early on. But this game doesn't really rely on that same kind of tension. It settles into a nice middle ground off the bat and sticks with it throughout. It's just two different ways to approach survival horror, and I like this one better personally. I also like how straightforward the rules are with item drops, at least on standard difficulty, which is what I played on because I'm a games journalist. If I killed somebody, they'd drop something. If I smashed a barrel or a crate, it'd have at least one item in it or a snake that you could kill for health. I never felt like the game was being stingy with its ammo, and that meant that I could play a little bit more freely as long as I stayed fairly accurate, which I can assure you I did not. Here's a clip of me somehow missing a melee attack on a crate, which I bet you didn't even think was possible for a locked animation. Sometimes it kinda didn't make sense where these items were coming from, like, why does this dog have handgun ammo? Does he stay strapped? But I mean, hey, I'll take it. I'm just glad his little doggy gun is the same caliber as my human-sized gun, and this isn't like a dog ears type of situation. I really like the shop and inventory system as well. The case that you need to slot everything into is just about the only video game inventory system that feels like anything other than a nuisance. I usually hate inventory management, but I always liked how Resident Evil went about it. It was one of my favorite things about 2 Remake as well. And being able to collect gemstones and insert them into treasures you pick up around the village to make them more valuable for selling is a really interesting mechanic. It really pushes you to make the most out of exploration and be a little bit patient to get the most bang for your buck. I think the only thing I really didn't appreciate around all of this was the fact that you needed to spend money to repair your knife every single time. That was pretty annoying. The knife is a very helpful tool. It lets you parry, immediately get enemies off of you, and lets you pull off finishers, features, all of which you can't do if it's broken or you haven't picked up any spares. And honestly, I do think it's a good idea to give it limited durability because it's probably the most powerful item in the game and you don't want the player to feel too safe. But I wish the game just gave you like knife repair kit pickups in certain spots instead of going the route of buying the repairs, because that way a certain percentage of my money wouldn't always just get spent on fixing this thing. I guess you could say it's just the game asking you to make a tough choice, but honestly, it was always a no-brainer to get the knife fixed. It was so useful and made the whole game more enjoyable, so having paid repairs felt like my income was just being taxed. Also, on the topic of currency, the fact that this game added microtransactions a couple of weeks after release, after it got glowing reviews and a bunch of people already bought it, is sneaky, underhanded, and almost as stupid as naming your meta currency CP. Really good thing there's nothing else that goes by that acronym. Oh boy, I love collecting CP. My favorite. Weapons in this game have a lot of punch behind them. They got a good kick, you know? Other words for assault. Pistols feel balanced, landing headshots with a rifle feels crunchy, and shotguns absolutely rip through villagers. You can shotgun dudes in half and watch them slip off their own legs. There's also a lot of both subtle and more obvious uses of haptic feedback and adaptive triggers on PS5, which makes that version feel even more intense, and it does that fun little trick where you can feel your individual footsteps in the controller and how they feel on different surfaces. I'm not gonna lie, I played around on this bridge for an embarrassing amount of time before moving on. The thing that really brings all the combat pieces together, though, is the ability to parry attacks with your knife, even if the weapon is thrown at you or it's something huge like a mutated demon arm or a chainsaw. Yeah, you can parry giant chainsaws with your little pocket knife. It's great. It's actually the thing that convinced me to buy this game, I'll be totally honest. And while it doesn't actually ask for very precise timing on these parries, it's quite generous with that actually. You know how important it is to keep the knife's durability up so you can keep using it, so you need to make sure you preserve it as much as possible. Parrying can redirect projectiles and stagger enemies, and it just feels so satisfying to pull off even if it's not super tough. And when you get a real rhythm going with all these combat pieces together, it feels obscenely satisfying to mow down enemies. Encounters in RE4 also have a level of depth and verticality to them that I think a lot of survival horror games are missing. Like, I get that being locked in a crowd of enemies that are breathing down your neck is scarier than some dickhead throwing stones at you from way over yonder, but if I'm just walking down endless corridors and rooms with 10 zombies on my ass and then turning and shooting whatever's in front of me, that starts getting boring after a while. Trying to juggle a bit of distance combat with the up close and personal is just a lot more interesting. And this game also makes sure to switch up the scenery before locations start to wear out their welcome, starting off in open sections of the village and then putting you in an ornate indoor church setting for a while and then dropping you into an underground mine area and then sending you to Shutter Island. And within each of these you'll have a few unique little gameplay moments where you harpoon a big fish or ride the Indiana Jones ride at Disneyland. Why was somebody typing down here? These were definitely nice little pace changers, although I wish we had a few more of these near the end because there's a lot of big encounters at the end, and the game could have used a few switch-ups to keep it from feeling bloated. I'm a little bit surprised with how many bosses this game has also. I was expecting like 3, maybe 4, but there's like 7 to 10 depending on what you classify as a boss, and they're okay. I mean, I like a lot of the designs, and generally I think they did the best they could do mechanically for a game like this. A lot of the bosses have a fair bit of spectacle, they're very nimble and monstrous, and they have interesting movesets, but really the biggest problem in most of them is the arena. They all have these awkward layouts that are hard to navigate and can get in the way of things. It's always weird climbing up ladders during fights and lightly jogging away from the spawn of Satan. A few of the gimmicks worked fine, and I never thought a boss was outright bad, but I think the game would have been better off if it had axed a few of them. Like, this game isn't really built for boss encounters. I don't know why you have so many. I was surprisingly into the story for this game as well. Maybe not enough to deep dive into the notes and unravel Umbrella's involvement in all this. I'm not a big reader when it comes to games, but the cutscenes and story that were immediately in front of me held my interest pretty well. I like how they set up high stakes early on by infecting Leon in like the first hour or so, and they made sure to keep things moving at all times, just introducing characters at a solid rate and not letting the story sit for too long for the sake of gameplay. It's not exactly a thought-provoking masterpiece of a story, but it's engaging and entertaining, and I was honestly surprised with how much I liked Ashley. She is not far from a classic stereotypical damsel in distress. I mean, there's a lot of... But to be fair, she is just some random citizen who got tossed into a terrifying situation and is infected by some hive mind poison thing, and all things considered, she does start pulling her weight a little and helps Leon out of a few jams. She does get captured, like, a lot. I definitely prefer when companions in games manage to stay alive on their own instead of you needing to constantly save them in the middle of combat, because this just gets a little bit annoying sometimes. But I did enjoy watching her try and brave her way through the night section to free Leon, and she definitely comes in clutch a few times later on. She has enough charisma for me to like it when she's around, which is good enough, because honestly I thought she'd be really annoying. Voice acting overall is fine. I mean, it's a Resident Evil game, I'm not expecting anything crazy. Ada's actress is a little bit weak in my opinion, but not remotely bad enough for this. In fact, super spicy take incoming, nothing's worth this. Stop being stupid, stupid. And the writing feels like it has the perfect amount of camp, not as laugh-out-loud goofy as the moments in RE2 or parts of RE8 that I've seen, and not completely stoic and devoid of fun either. It's just good, solid 2000s horror movie level cheese, especially with Leon's one-liners. That bingo line is one of the top 2 greatest video game lines of all time, right below "So long, gay Bowser." But probably my favorite moment in the game was actually during gameplay when Ashley and I were running away from some villagers and she got absolutely sniped by this axe. Like, she's fully dead. Did you see how disgusting that impact was? I did not protect her at all. I wasn't really expecting to buy Resident Evil 4 Remake, at least not this early. I just wasn't convinced that the series was really my thing after 2 Remake failed to get its hooks in me, and the other games didn't sell me enough to give them a fair shake. But I decided to give it a chance after all the praise it received, and at this point I can say, yeah, it was all well deserved. I did have a few issues with its third act in terms of pacing and the uptick in boss fights, but anything outside of that gets into nitpick territory. This is just overall a very well crafted game, and honestly, I still don't know how much to attribute that to the original versus the remake, because of course I haven't played the original, but if you're like me and haven't been sold on the RE franchise until this point, I wouldn't be too quick to dismiss this one. I think it was absolutely worth it at full price, but if you're more on the fence, then maybe wait for a sale and give it a shot. You might just love it. And as for me, I mean, I'm definitely more invested in what's next for this series. I might even try and play some of the older ones that are already out that I never got around to, maybe even give RE2 another shot to see if this game unlocked something for me. I'm pretty excited for more Resident Evil. Let me know what you guys thought of the game, what you think about the series overall. If you enjoyed the video, leave it a like. If you're new here, subscribe. Join the Discord, it's in the description, and I'll see you next time. Peace.